Witam na pierwszej sesji konferencji bardzo ciekawej, jak można stwierdzić na podstawie zaproponowanych tekstów referatów przez prelegentów, a także biorąc pod uwagę ich dorobek naukowy. W pierwszej sesji porozmawiamy o losach studentów w okresie sowietyzacji Europy Środkowo-Wschodniej. Mamy 4 prelegentów, którzy przedstawią swoje referaty. Pierwszą naszą prelegentką jest pani magister Marta Glossová z Uniwersytetu Comeniusa imienia Komeńskiego w Bratysławie. Pani Marta Glossová przedstawi referat dotyczący studentów uniwersytetów słowackich w procesie transformacji Czechosłowacji w okresie demokracji ludowej w latach 1945-1948. Pani Glossová jest doktorantką na Uniwersytecie Komeńskiego w Bratysławie. Zajmuje się losami studentów w okresie pierwszej dekady po II wojnie światowej. Szanowni Państwo, jeszcze chciałbym wspomnieć o jednej sprawie. Referaty będą trwały 20 minut. Tyle czasu przeznaczyliśmy dla każdego z prelegentów. Natomiast po ich zakończeniu otworzę dyskusję. Bardzo proszę, aby pytania były jak najbardziej zwięzłe i proszę też pamiętać o ograniczeniach czasowych. Mrs. Glossová, it's your turn. You've got 20 minutes to present your lecture.
Okay. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's a pleasure and honor for me to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation. At the beginning, I would like to introduce myself. As it was told, my name is Marta Glossová. I'm an external PhD student at Comenius University in Bratislava. My research is focused on university students and the role they played in the Slovak history of the 20th century. I would like to present you today one part of my research which is concerned with the period between the end of World War II and the communist coup d'état in Czechoslovakia, which was in 1948. With the help of the archival sources, memoirs, statistics and specialized literature, I will attempt to prove that the communists were aware of the students' potential and expected their resistance during the overthrow in February 1948. Therefore, they were adopting intentional and effective measures to weaken the student movement even during the period of relative democracy in these 3 years after World War II. I would like to prove this endeavor of the communist politicians on the example of three events from the mentioned period. At first, it will be the screening of the political and national reliability of the students, then the nationalization of residence halls in Slovakia and its consequences, and the last point, the involvement of university students in political fight and resistance and the reaction to this involvement. So that we can move on solid ground, I would like to briefly and generally describe the period from the years of 1945 to 48 in Slovakia, just in few points. The first important point was the Slovak national uprising in 1944, even before the end of the war, which was coordinated with the USSR, the Red Army, and also the London exile government was gradually oriented itself towards the Moscow to the east. The second important point, the parliamentary elections in 1946 in Czechoslovakia. In the Czech part of the republic, they were won by the communists, but in the Slovak part, they were won by the Democratic Party. And it caused that the Democratic Party became the foe number 1 for the communists in Czechoslovakia. The third important event was the politicized process, the trial with the former president Josef Tiso, which also was politicized, or it was meant to discredit the Democratic Party. Also, it's important to mention the inscribing of the anti-establishment activity of the resistance groups again to the Democratic Party, and it caused the security crisis in Slovakia in the autumn of 1947. And finally, the communist coup, the overthrow in February 1948. So what role did the university students play in all this? Where can we find them? First, it's important to realize that unlike Czechia, Poland and other countries with a long university tradition, the first institution of higher education in Slovakia was established only after the formation of Czechoslovak Republic in 1919. In 1945, there were 3 such institutions in Slovakia. It was the Slovak University, which is nowadays Comenius University, and the universities of economics and engineering, and all were in Bratislava. Altogether, they had 12 faculties, and there was just something more than 8,000 students in the whole Slovakia. An effective influence on the university students was exercised also by their affiliation to the church, because approximately a third of inhabitants of residence halls was living at the Catholic residence hall called Svoradov boarding house, which was an important center for young Catholic intelligentsia in Slovakia. And it was the fact of which the communists were well aware. Here I'm coming back to my thesis that the communists were aware of the students' potential and expected their resistance during the overthrow in February 1948. Therefore, they were adopting intentional and effective measures to weaken the student movement, even during the period of so-called relative democracy, as I will show. Now, let us consider these measures in more detail, and I would like to shed light on 3 of them. The first measure is the so-called screening of political and national reliability of students, which occurred at universities in several stages in 1945 and 46. Screening committees were established at each faculty, and these were to investigate all students born before 1927, so as to know if, and this is the quotation, there are not any objections against their national and political reliability. End of the quotation. These would fail the screening under the classification C from the political perspective, who were former members of Gestapo, of the units employed in the fight against the Slovak national uprising, persons who were on trial by popular court, and all people engaged in any activity aimed against the Czechoslovak Republic. From the national perspective, Hungarians and Germans who claim allegiance to these nationalities after March 13, 1939, were targeted. Among those who passed the screening under the classification A would count all active participants of resistance, illegal workers and loyal citizens, and among those who passed conditionally till the end of their study under the classification B would be members of HSLS, which was the only allowed political party during the Slovak state, then officials of Hlinkova Garda, it was the military wing of this party, those citizens who gained any material and personal benefit by political activities, and also students of German, Hungarian and Italian universities. Thought it was not possible to figure out the overall number of the students who failed the screening, it seems that the number was not high, unlike the numbers which followed the purges in 1948, when 17% of students in Slovakia got expelled. It is nevertheless important to mention this screening, since it opened the doors to screening culture in Slovakia, which after the coup of 1948 became a favorite tool of purging of work or student collectives across the whole society. Due its force, it became a form of litmus test of characters of those executing the screening and even of those being screened. The second significant means of which the communists tried, and I have to say successfully, to weaken the influence of university students in society and their reaction to the coup was the nationalization of residence halls. This policy was related to the previous nationalization of all schools in Czechoslovakia, and out of those affected residence halls, it was the Protestant Štefánikov domov housing ward and the Catholic Svoradov housing ward. These residence halls were built in the interwar period from the gifts of the faithful of both churches, And the reason of their creation was that the state had managed to provide accommodation only for a very small number of the students. By its size and significance, Sforadov was the one standing out, and more than 500 students had lived there before its nationalization, which was approximately 1/3 of all students living in residence halls. Additionally, Sforadov had also become a center for young Catholic intelligentsia. Ladislav Novomecký, who was a representative of the Ministry of Education and a communist, labeled this place as a Slovak Alcazar. Communists considered the takeover of residence halls to be very important and argued that the role of the church in educating the young was neither suitable in this age anymore nor meeting student requirements. The nationalization of residence halls was seen as, this is the quotation, a crucial step towards the progressively thinking student. In reality, and this is the quotation from the memoir of one communist student of that age, they were well aware that the one who controls the education and the young is also controlling the future of the nation and the state. End of the quotation. The takeover of the control of education in residence halls was thus deemed to be essential, and to this end, communists employed both legal and less legal means. In residence hall, communist students were setting up organized parties, which were, also the quotation, the first very important step towards the elimination of the old owners of the residence halls, such as Sforadov and Stefanikov boarding houses. To nationalize Sforadov, the violence was used against some of its students when during the night of 3rd to 4th July 1945, the state security detained 64 students of Sforadov boarding house and accused them of fascism and collaboration, and kept them detained for 2 days. It's necessary to mean that it was in the time between the negotiation of the bill in the Slovak National Council and its approval. 10 students continued to be under arrest, and even though the rest was set free, they were kept under surveillance at home. They could not enter a canteen unless surveillance and were not allowed to meet. They were given the indication that these measures would have stopped if they had sent a written request for nationalization of Sforadov. Since the power to decide about the residence halls had been bestowed upon the representatives of the Ministry of Education, the original founders lost their ability to influence the choice of which students to accommodate there. During the student admission process, their national and state reliability was thoroughly controlled, and those students accused of an anti-state activity were denied accommodation. Any political engagement of Sforadov students was suppressed by their moving and by some concrete educational measures realized by the state police, and therefore the last significant activities of Sforadov residents were connected with the 1946 elections. Though communists were counting on some protests from Sforadov, eventually, again the memoirs of the young communist student, the weak leadership of the division of Young Democrats did not manage to organize, neither in the autumn of 1947 nor at the beginning of 1948, any bigger reaction against that, even though, especially at Sforadov, they were trying. Now the third point, as the last example of the fact that the university students were in this political period active and that the communists were trying to eliminate them, I will mention the involvement of university students in political parties and also in illegal resistance groups and how the communists reacted to it. Despite their low numbers, university students played an even surprisingly significant role in the political parties and the elections of 1946. An interesting fact from this period is that the average age of the members of individual political parties was relatively low. Only 8% of the secretaries of Democratic Party was more than 45 years old, whereas up to 47% of them were less than 25 years old. The reason behind was that the majority of the elder non-communist politicians was discredited by their participation in the politics of the Slovak state. Democratic Party had a few 24 or 25 years old members of parliament as well. Moreover, Democratic Party had a comparatively numerous representation of intellectuals, double the number with respect to the communists. What is connected with this openness to the young is that there was a change in the election law in Czechoslovakia, which lessened the threshold of active election right, which means to vote, from 21 to 18 years, and the passive election right, so to be elected, from 26 to 21. Students were also active when the parliamentary elections of 1946 took place. 2 days before the election, on May 23rd, a demonstration attended by thousands of youth near Svoradov boarding house with the help of Democratic Party and aimed against the communists. At that time, Svoradov boarding house was already being nationalized. However, it remained to be a strong base for Catholic and democratic youth. Communist supporters and partisans burst into the manifesting crowd and attacked them physically. Several students were injured by stones or axes, by a negligently driven lorry which brought the provoking communists, and even by firearms. 16 people were injured and required medical treatment. Allegedly, one student died to the injuries, and his body disappeared, which was interpreted by Slovak historian Robert Letz as a possible provocation from the side of the state security, the secret police. More and more university students were questioned for anti-state activity, which was what was the point? Shortly after the restoration of Czechoslovakia, a charge of anti-state activity became a dangerous label, since the real anti-state activities were aimed against the unified Czechoslovak state. There were several resistance groups, both in Slovakia and abroad, whose goal was to restore the independent Slovakia. University students were involved in them in some cases, but the real meaning of these anti-state activities was overestimated, because in reality their participants were discovered very soon and did not manage to carry out almost any anti-state activity in time. It is important, though, that more and more activities, which were rather anti-communist than anti-state, got to be labeled as anti-state. Therefore, the then propaganda and argumentation of the security units, which considered the word communist to be synonymous of progressive, often labeled as anti-state activity those ones which had a religious or democratic character. The main center of these activities was indeed the Svoradov boarding house. The number of its residents who were questioned and detained under the suspicion of the mentioned anti-state activity was so high that the then police office began to be told about the second Svoradov. At that time, the coercion and torture used during the questioning was known also in the Prague parliament. It is thus surprising that despite its happening before the communist coup, it did not cause a more significant reaction in the parliament. And the final question, what was the consequence of all these factors? Did the communist fear of the Slovak university students' protest against their assumption of power came true? In Prague, 2 mass marches of university students to the Prague castle took place at the end of February. Even though they did not achieve anything apart from tens injured and detained students, they came down to history as some of the few open protests in Czechoslovak Republic inhabitants against the communist coup. In fact, no similar event took place in Bratislava, although the communists were counting on it and were ready to react. On the contrary, many students inhabited in Bratislava residence halls supported the communist coup by subscribing to the declaration on February 24th. The question is, why? The cause will be a whole complex of reasons. Maybe the less developed tradition of higher education in Slovakia, on the average younger university students in Slovakia than in Czechia, because universities in Czechia were closed during the war, and after the 6 years long break, many older students began to study there, and so on. Nevertheless, I think that the surprisingly small reaction of Slovak university students was also influenced by the communist measures I have already mentioned. At first, the screening of political and national reliability, which foreshadowed the future atmosphere of prejudices, informing and getting fired. Then, the relatively strong involvement of university students in political parties, as well as in illegal resistance groups, and the following abuse of the notion of anti-state activity for all anti-communist activity. And finally, the nationalization of residence halls, which allowed the representatives of the Ministry of Education, being controlled by communists, to influence the composition of inhabitants of residence halls, particularly of Svoradov and Štefanikov domov boarding houses, and thereby to weaken their position as the centers of democratic, non-communist youth. Thank you very much for your attention.
W tej chwili przechodzimy już na teren Jugosławii. Myślę, że tematyka jest bardzo ciekawa, słabo w Polsce znana. Pan Martin Previszyć przedstawi nam losy studentów jugosłowiańskich w okresie konfliktu Tito-Stalin w latach 1948-1956. Zagadnienie to jest niezwykle istotne w kontekście zrozumienia procesu sowietyzacji i konsolidacji bloku wschodniego. Pan Martin Previszyć jest adiunktem w Instytucie Historii Uniwersytetu w Zagrzebiu. Specjalizuje się w dziejach represji komunistycznej w Jugosławii. Jest autorem monografii o obozie na wyspie Goli Otok. Mr. Previszyć, it's your turn. You've got 20 minutes to present your lecture.
Thank you, Mateusz. I'll try to be brief as possible. I'd like to make a brief introduction, important for understanding my topic. What was Yugoslavia from 45 to 48, when Tito-Stalin split occurred? When partisans led by Communist Party of Yugoslavia took over power after the World War II, they began thorough process of Stalinization of Yugoslavia. It meant basically implementing various Soviet models, not just in politics, but ideology, economy, but of course in culture, sports, press, etc., and of course education. So Yugoslav education after 45 was a subject to strong Sovietization, especially higher education. Of course, if you want to control future, you have to control education. So many textbooks, curriculums, scientific literature, etc. were imported from Soviet Union, translated and widely used in the university system. Hundreds of Yugoslav students were sent to Soviet Union and other Eastern Bloc countries, mostly Czechoslovakia, for higher education, but this is the topic of our next presenter. So, similar to Yugoslavia in general, Yugoslav students as well were subject of political indoctrination and Sovietization. And this fact will play an important factor in understanding splits in student organizations after the 1948. Because of the Tito's action in Greek civil war, relations with Bulgaria and Albania, Tito-Stalin split occurred in June 1948 when Inform Bureau issued its famous Inform Bureau resolution. And shortly afterwards, especially during the late 1948 and the first half of 1949, throughout Yugoslavia, party members held numerous party meetings where they discussed accusations stated in Inform Bureau resolution. Stand toward Inform Bureau resolution drew line between those who supported Tito and those who supported Stalin, which were called Comenists or IPNtv. I will deal in this paper mostly with those students who sided with Stalin. It is important to stress that IPNtv or Comenists were a very heterogeneous group, and many confused or even neutral Yugoslav communists were branded as Stalin supporters and later jailed. Why am pointing this out? Because similar faction battles as one during the party meetings, regular party meetings of Communist Party, were held at universities. Like ordinary party members, university students and their professors debated Inform Bureau resolution on the university party organization or some other organization, a youth organization or SKOI or something like that, sided with Stalin or Tito and later faced the consequences of their choice. I will point out examples from two biggest universities in Yugoslavia at that time, University of Zagreb and University of Belgrade. For instance, state secret police called UDBA documents revealed that the strongest groups of Inform Bureau supporters in the city of Zagreb were on Zagreb University, and the secret police should pay special attention because these groups pose real threat, quotation. In the 1949, General Secretary of Zagreb Communist Party organization at that time, and later President of Presidency of Yugoslavia in the 1980s, Mika Špiljak, said in the closed party meeting that, I quote, members of University Inform Bureau groups are taking their orders from Moscow spy centers, usually stationed in the embassies or consulates, and giving Russians the information they need. Špiljak, a high-ranking party member, said that Zagreb University has bad reputation because of many Inform Bureau supporters, and he called University of Zagreb as center of Inform Bureau activity. Main goal of University Party organization, he said, is, quote, transforming university from Inform Bureau center to hotspot of our battle against party criticizers. So we can see how harsh that battle was. Another UDBA report, dated May 1949, was sent to Central Committee in Belgrade, Control Committee in Belgrade, a very high and important party body, and stated that the most organized Stalin supporter sections in whole Croatia are one within University of Zagreb organization and many other faculty sub-organizations. So, main organization of Stalin supporters in university, and it mainly consisted of students, were called Bolshevik faction. It was like main IB organization in the Zagreb University, Bolshevik faction, and after initial defeat of Stalin supporters during the summer of 48 and spring 49 period, they became clandestine organization with different branches on various faculties. Main goals were recruiting new members and distributing Inform Bureau material. Other groups in Zagreb University were Bolshevik factions, of course, I said, led by Ivan Berger and Ivan Grubisic, philosophy faculty, Inform Bureau organization, economy faculty, Balvan organization, led by Petar Balvan, Vladimir Tomić and Branko Vučković, revolutionary committee for university and high schools, Bendeković group, technical faculty group, and the others. During my work on PhD thesis, History of Goli Otok Labor Camp, I met one of the members of top university IB organization called Bolshevik faction, Ivan Esih. He told me what his group was really about. Connecting with other groups in university, recruiting many IB members as possible, distributing IB material, and waiting for the Soviets. He did state it, they contemplated of killing of some high-ranking party members like Moshe Pijade, Milovan Đilas, Aleksandar Ranković, but as he said, it was just a dream. Of course, they had some really ridiculous actions, like flattening the tires of party officials in the city. So they just came to the car, flattened the tire or broke the window and then ran. So it was their part of battle in a world revolution. Vlado Bobinac, another Inform Bureau supporter who studied history on philosophy faculty in Zagreb, remembered that one group of Stalin supporters in his history group who refused to get in line with Tito were, let's say, punished. That the student organization who sided with Tito proclaimed boycott, which meant that the other students were forbidden to communicate with them, sit with them, help them, etc., etc. Vlado Bobinac wrote a letter to President of Student Party Organization where he disagreed with measures taken against his fellow students. But the leader of party organization concluded Bobinac's reaction is a breaching of party line. So Bobinac was arrested, jailed, and sent to Goli Otok. Second very important university organization, party organization, which was affected by strong support for Stalin was Belgrade University. It is estimated that around from 25,000 students, there were around 2,636 party members or candidates until late 59, and 1,128 supported Stalin or revolution. Very strong support for Stalin was the Faculty of Medicine, 640 people, and Higher Technical School in Belgrade, 692 persons. Other faculties in Belgrade with big support for Stalin amongst the students were Belgrade Philosophy Faculty, Economic Faculty, and Agriculture Faculty. Many Belgrade University professors were criticized because they were using Soviet textbooks, same ones that were officially proposed before 1948 and Revolution of Politburo. Such was example of case of agriculture professor Drakulic, who was under party criticism because he left Soviet textbooks during the break, so all the students can look at it. It was branded as helpful to Stalin. There were some attempts to connect illegal organizations in Belgrade and Zagreb, but they failed. One more interesting thing is atmosphere in the university during the 48-49 on party meetings or student meetings. Usually meetings where the resolution in Politburo was discussed were crowded and pro-Titoist line prevailed. So those who supported Stalin were booed, insulted, sometimes beaten up, and of course noticed by the secret police. Case of all famed Communist Party of Yugoslavia member Mirko Marković, professor of economic faculty in Belgrade, will tell the story. He was an old communist, spent 9 years in Soviet Union, where he obtained his PhD. He was a teacher at Komunistički Universitet nacionalnih manjina. It's like a very important faculty in Russia, fought in civil war, and commanded Brigade George Washington in the rank of captain. After the Politburo resolution, he sided with Stalin, and during the big party meeting in Belgrade University on the 2nd September 48, in front of many professors and students, he was booed, insulted, and thrown out of the meeting. On his way out, he said, "You can expel me, but you are the expelled party." Shortly afterward, he was arrested and jailed. Like other 15,700 Stalin supporters, many of students who sided with the Politburo resolution were jailed and incarcerated in very infamous labor camps, especially built for them. Most notorious camp was Goli Otok, Barren Island, camp where around 13,000 Iberovci were detained, beaten up, deprived of sleep, lacking food and water, forced to do heavy labor, exposed to epidemics, and sometimes randomly killed. It is interesting that the first two groups brought up to Ireland in the summer of '94 were comprised most of students, and we are talking about 800 to 1,000 people. What to conclude? Like ordinary party members or old Yugoslav communists, students in Zagreb and Belgrade were heavily debated political situation after the Politburo resolution. Factions occurred very rapidly, but during the late 49 and through 1949, pro-Titoist line took control, of course with a little help of secret police. With Tito's victory in the first phase of clash with Stalin, pro-Stalinist or student organizations began to do clandestine work directly, mostly to propaganda. Many of pro-Stalinist students were expelled from their universities or party or youth organizations and sent to labor camps, especially in famous Golotok prison camp. Although pro-Stalinist students existed after 51, they were just small, isolated pockets rather than organized opposition like before. Similar to the situation in the whole country, students were part of radical radicalization, and after the split, they fell as the victims, those who supported Stalin, of course, or of rapidly changing political atmosphere, ideology, and Stalinist rule of early Tito's regime, where political opponents had always very dire future, no matter how political ideology or economic isolation combined with war paranoia forested the harsh treatment of Stalin supporters in Yugoslavia. Thank you.
Dziękuję za ten bardzo ciekawy wykład. Pozostajemy przy tematyce rozłamu Tito-Stalin. Kolejny referat będzie dotyczył studentów jugosłowiańskich w Związku Radzieckim w okresie konfliktu jugosłowiańsko-radzieckiego. Wygłosi go pani Kaori Kimura z Instytutu Studiów Słowiańskich Rosyjskiej Akademii Nauk. Pani Kimura jest absolwentką studiów prawa i nauk politycznych Uniwersytetu w Tokio. Jest również absolwentką Uniwersytetu imienia Łomonosowa w Moskwie. Zajmuje się stosunkami międzynarodowymi, relacjami między Związkiem Radzieckim a Jugosławią, Węgrami w okresie po II wojnie światowej, a także właśnie losami emigracji jugosłowiańskiej, politycznej w okresie konfliktu Jugosławii z blokiem wschodnim. Mrs. Kimura, it is your turn. You've got 20 minutes to present your very interesting lecture.
Thank you. So, deterioration of the relations between Belgrade and Moscow, which occurred in March 1948, led the country of people's democracy, Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Romania, and Poland, into a new stage of their diplomacy. Especially after the publication of the solution of the second meeting of Cominform, the political climate in the Eastern Bloc was shortly changed. All of the leaders of those countries approved the resolution, and they were involved in powerful anti-Yugoslav media campaign from 1949 to 1954. People saw a mountain of articles criticizing Yugoslav politics in newspapers, radio broadcasts, and some public trials almost on daily basis. At the beginning of the conflict between Stalin and Tito, thousands of Yugoslavs, including officers and students, were living abroad. They had been sent to study military and technical subjects, mainly in the USSR and Czechoslovakia, and countries of people's democracy. Most of them were inclined to trust Cominform's line and refused to return home. They emigrated to the countries where they lived at that time and organized small groups of emigres. Many Yugoslav diplomats who were living abroad at that time also showed their intention to approve the Cominform's political line. Most notable diplomats who later led the Yugoslav emigre were Ludmila Golubović, Momčilo Josić, and Slobodan Ivanović. Besides those individuals, there were people who were for the Cominform's line in Yugoslavia. Although it was too difficult to escape from Yugoslavia crossing its border, some Yugoslav Cominformists managed to do so. One of the most notable people who escaped from Tito's Yugoslavia was Pero Papivoda. He was Major General of Air Force. In the end of 1948, those most notable individuals gathered in Moscow and organized a leading group of Yugoslav emigres Cominformists in the USSR and the country of people's democracy, and started publishing their newspaper, the Socialističku Yugoslaviju, from 1st May 1949. And later, by January 1951, they developed their activities and established a coordination center for activities of Yugoslav political immigrants in USSR and the countries of people's democracy. Their activity was under control from the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. From the beginning of the Stalin-Tito conflict, there existed a plan to use Yugoslav immigrants in the USSR and the countries of people's democracy for the purpose of carrying out the anti-Tito propaganda campaign. Yugoslav immigrants in the USSR and the countries of People's Democracy formed their own groups, which published newspapers, broadcasted radio programs, and took part in the political, sometimes diplomatic events. According to the date from the beginning of December 1948, in the USSR, there were 572 Yugoslavs which approved the Comenius resolution. 434 of them studied in the academies and military schools. 47 studied in the universities of the USSR. 73 trained in the military school, and 28 just arrived in the Soviet Union to immigrate to the country. The aim of this paper is to review the role of Yugoslav political immigrants conformists who were students in the USSR and countries of People's Democracy in the context of diplomatic history of the USSR and history of Cominform. In this presentation, paying attention to their activities in the first 3 years of their immigration in the countries, from 1949 to 1951, particularly an anti-Tito campaign in the World Federation of Democratic Youth, International Union of Students, and the Second World Festival of Youth and Students in Budapest, 1949, I'd like to clarify in which way Yugoslav immigrants were accepted to the youth democratic organizations of the world in that period. As I mentioned, when the second resolution of Cominform was published in June 1949, there are a great number of Yugoslav students studied in USSR. Some of them wrote in their autobiographies how they became a political immigrant. One of Yugoslav students who studied in the Faculty of Electrical Engineering in an institute in Zverdlovsk wrote his own story. Quote, "In 1947, I was sent to Soviet Union with a big group of Yugoslavs who wanted to study in the USSR. In June 1948, I finished my first year and went back to Yugoslavia for summer vacation. I heard about the Cominform resolution on my way to home. At that time, I didn't understand the reason why Cominform criticized the Yugoslav political line. I spent my summer vacation at that time. In the end of summer, I received a letter from Belgrade, and it said that I wouldn't be able to continue my study in Soviet Union anymore. So I decided to go to Ljubljana to continue my education in the second year in the Faculty of Electrical Engineering. I met some students who were in the same situation to me. We discussed various political issues, diplomatic notes, which were exchanged between Moscow and Belgrade, and so on. I came to think that Cominform's decision was totally right. At that time, I realized that State Security Administration was following the students who came back from the USSR and got information that I would shortly be arrested. Therefore, I decided to cross the Yugoslav-Hungarian border." Unquote. When this student wrote the autobiography, he located in Hungary, waited for the permission of entrance to the Soviet Union. Later, he became a political immigrant in Hungary and started working in Slovenian sector of Radio Budapest. I would like to point out that at first this student didn't understand the reason why an exclusion of Yugoslavia from Cominform. In the letter, he mentioned that he couldn't see any anti-Soviet propaganda in Yugoslavia till the publication of the Comintern's resolution. However, he changed his mind and came to firmly believe the rightness of the resolution by the early autumn. It was not only a case. There was many Yugoslav students who decided to cross the Yugoslav border to neighbor countries in the same reason. In early 1949, Yugoslav immigrants in the USSR and the countries of People's Democracy didn't know each other. Therefore, in January 1949, Papi Voda was sent to Romania and Czechoslovakia for the purpose of developing relations with Yugoslav immigrants in those countries. By April 1949, Yugoslav immigrants group in Moscow could establish relations with the small groups of Yugoslav political immigrants in Bulgaria, Hungary, and Albania too. Therefore, we can say that activities of Yugoslav political immigrants was centralized. In this situation, the Second World Festival of Youth and Students was held in Budapest from 14th to 24th August 1949. The representatives of diplomatic organizations of youth from 82 countries took part in the festival. The festival program included sports competitions in various sports, political seminars and discussions, exhibitions and concerts. In the big stadium in Újpest, its northern part of Budapest, sound of fanfare heralded the opening of the Second World Festival of Youth and Students. When boys and girls, the representative of progressive youth of the world, formed up in columns and passed the stand with their national flags, an incident which was related to Yugoslav representative occurred. A representative of Yugoslav organization, the People's Youth of Yugoslavia, David Mijic, was arrested by an agent of the Hungarian police and detained for 40 hours, and after that taken to the border. Next day, on August 15th, he had to send a protest letter to the Secretariat of World Federation of Democratic Youth, which was published in newspaper Borba. It is not the only thing. Hungarian government had not issued visa for the delegation of People's Youth of Yugoslavia by 40th August. In this connection, the Yugoslav delegation couldn't attend the opening ceremony of the festival. Borba criticized Hungarian government. However, this issue was sufficiently within expectation. According to a report from the first secretary of the Central Committee of the All-Union Leninist Young Communist League, Mikhailov, there was held a meeting of the Exclusive Committee of the World Federation of Democratic Youth in the end of May 1949. In this meeting, representative of People's Youth of Yugoslavia showed his wishes to take part in the Second World Festival of Youth and Students. Yugoslav representative didn't change his mind even after the publication of the Comintern's resolution. Mikhailov talked on this issue with the secretary of the Central Committee of Hungarian Workers' Party, ENG. Gere proposed that Hungary would refuse to issue Hungarian entrance visa for Yugoslavian delegation in the day before the opening ceremony of the festival. At the same time, Gere suggested to invite young Yugoslav immigrants who lived in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, and Hungary. However, Mikhailov suggested issuing no more than 5 Hungarian entrance visas for Yugoslav delegations so that Yugoslavs wouldn't be able to use the festival for their purpose, and even they would give up participating in the festival by themselves. This decision was accepted by Maciej Rakosz, and he set an additional term of the participation for Yugoslav youngers. Yugoslavs who participated in the first World Festival of Youth and Students in Prague 1947 wouldn't be able to take part in the festival in Budapest. According to the information from the Executive Committee of the festival from August 2nd, Yugoslav representative informed in the 2 last meetings of the Executive Committee of the World Federation of Democratic Youth and the International Union of Students that Yugoslavia was ready to send about 100 participants, youth and students. At the same time, they emphasized that they were working for peace and democracy and ready to go with the Soviet Union. However, the Executive Committee of the World Federation of Democratic Youth and the International Union of Students adopted Yugoslav's words and started thinking about taking representatives from the members of Yugoslav political immigrants to the organization instead of the representative of People's Youth of Yugoslavia. Also, Yugoslav students who were political immigrants in Prague, Budapest, Sofia, and Prague had mentioned that they would be ready for taking part in the festival in Budapest. They didn't participate in the Second World War Festival, second Festival of Youth and Students in Budapest as a representative of Yugoslav political immigrants in USSR, the country of people's democracy. They asked the executive committee of the festival in which way they have to take part in the festival.
Mrs. Kimura, pardon, I just only want to remind you that you've got 5 minutes.
Okay.
So hurry up.
Okay. Then they were recommended that it would be better to participate not as a Yugoslav representative, but a partner of students in which they studied at that time. Adapting proposition of the organization from France, Poland, and Albania, the exclusion of the organization People's Youth of Yugoslavia from the World Federation of Democratic Youth became a subject of discussion at the board meeting of Executive Committee of the World Federation of Democratic Youth in Bucharest in January 1950. It was decided in the meeting of Central Committee of Communist Party of Soviet Union on 9th January 1950 that the representative of all Union Leninist Young Communist League would have to support the idea of exclusion of people's youth of Yugoslavia. Almost simultaneously with that, the board meeting of the International Union of Students was held in London. It was in January 1950 and discussed a repute of their relations with the current leaders of Yugoslav student organizations. It was also under control of Central Committee of Communist Party of Soviet Union. Some Yugoslav immigrants students wrote letters to the Central Committee of those youth democratic organizations so that they would exclude the representative of the people's youth of Yugoslavia. Those two organizations had discussed the issues of exclusion of the representative of people's use of Yugoslavia during 1950. And till the end of 1950, they made a decision to break their relations with the organizations and decided to accept the Yugoslav representative from the members of Yugoslav political immigrants in the Soviet Union and the countries of people's democracy by the end of 1950. Establishment of the Coordination Center of Activities of Yugoslav political immigrants in USSR and the countries of people's democracy in Moscow in January 1951 was a turning point for Yugoslav political immigrants in those countries. The organization sent their representatives in various international organizations which were under control of Moscow, such as the World Federation of Trade Union, the Women's International Democratic Federation, and so on. Yugoslav political immigrants' activities became more official and they started providing more and more aggressive anti-Tito propaganda campaign from this period. Thank you.
Dziękuję za kolejny bardzo ciekawy wykład poświęcony sprawom jugosłowiańskim, ale też sprawom bloku wschodniego. Myślę, że w czasie dyskusji pojawią się pytania z Państwa strony. A teraz wracamy na Ukrainę i ostatni referat w tej sesji. Pan Roman Genega, przypomnę, adiunkt na Wydziale Historycznym Uniwersytetu imienia Iwana Franki w Lwowie. Bardzo proszę o zabranie głosu.
Dziękuję. Dzień dobry, Szanowni Państwo. Prezentuję referat na temat przyjaciele czy wrogowie, relacje między studentami a wykładowcami lwowskich uczelni w latach 1944 na 1953. Idea licznego środowiska akademickiego lwowskich uczelni w połowie XX wieku zajmowali dotychczas skromne miejsce w historiografii. W czasach sowieckich problem ten był przedstawiony wyłącznie z perspektywy propagandy komunistycznej. Impulsem do zmiany podejścia do prowadzenia badań było uzyskanie przez Ukrainę niepodległości. Od niedawna naukowcy nadają więcej uwagi nowym tematom badawczym, na przykład historii lokalnej, historii człowieka, badaniom dotyczącym historii poszczególnych wspólnot, wśród których znalazły swoje nisze naukowe tematy dotyczące wykładowców i studentów lwowskich. Szczególny temat studentów lwowskich jako najbardziej aktywnej grupy powojennego społeczeństwa i rzeczniak idei politycznych nie mógł nie przyciągnąć uwagi badaczy. Niektóre aspekty życia akademickiego stały się obiektem badań Romana Kowaliuka, Tamary Marusek, Stefana Sworaka i innych ukraińskich badaczy. Na początku swojego wystąpienia chciałbym zwrócić uwagę na to, skąd oraz jacy studenci przyjeżdżali na studia do Lwowa od razu po II wojnie światowej. Wraz z drugim przejściem bolszewików w lipcu 1944 roku wznowiono pracę tylko 7 wyższych uczelni działających u Lwowie przed wojną: Uniwersytetu, Instytutu Politechnicznego, Medycznego, Weterynarii Nauczycielskiego oraz Instytutu Handlu Rybnickiego. Następnie liczba uniwersytetów się podwoiła. Według planu bolszewickiego kierownictwa Lwów miał stać się ważnym ośrodkiem edukacyjnym, naukowym, swego rodzaju wzorcem rozwoju komunistycznego na zachodniej Ukrainie. W związku z tym w strukturze społecznej ludności miasta studenci zajmowali odrębne grupy. Odsetek studentów w stosunku do ogólnej liczby mieszkańców miasta stale wzrastał. Tutaj Państwo proszę zobaczyć statystykę. Widzimy, że liczba studentów wczesnych powojennych lat nie była trwała. Wynikało to z procesów deportacji ludności polskiej i rekrutacji w ciągu tego całego roku akademickiego demobilizowanych żołnierzy Armii Czerwonej. Ogólnie rzecz biorąc, ponad 42% kandydatów miało znaczną przerwę w kształceniu. Tylko Instytut Medyczny, biorąc pod uwagę specyfikę zawodu, ustawiał limit wiekowy od 17 do 35 lat. Початок року академічного 1944 на 45 w wyższych uczelniach powojennego Lwowa naznaczony był przez zniszczone procesy społeczne i polityczne. Miasto należało do strefy frontowej, co doprowadziło do stosowania przez radzieckie wojska już zniszczonych przez wojnę budynków uniwersyteckich jako szpitali, magazynów i koszar. Dlatego w tamtym czasie szkolnictwo wyższe faktycznie nie posiadało bazy materialno-technicznej. Trudne warunki bytowe, walka o powrót przestrzeni dla nauczania w jakim stopniu pomogła zbliżyć i stworzyć pełne zaufania relacje między wykładowcami a studentami. Narodowościowy i społeczny skład studentów był zróżnicowany. W pierwszych latach po wojnie przez akcje wysiedleńcze w Instytutach Politechnicznym, Medycznym, Weterynaryjnym oraz Instytutu Handlu Radzieckiego większość studentów stanowili Polacy. Tutaj czergowo kolejna statystyka. W uniwersytecie i instytutach wymagano prowadzenia wykładów tylko w języku polskim. W tych uczelniach, w których zajęcia były prowadzone w języku rosyjskim lub ukraińskim, dochodziło do zamieszek studenckich w celu wymuszenia prowadzenia zajęć w języku polskim. W celu uniknięcia takich nieporozumień dyrektor Instytutu Medycznego Grigorij Skosogorenko poszedł na bezprecedensowy krok. W specjalnym podaniu poprosił władze miasta o zważenie na polską tradycję i przeniesienie obchodów 50. rocznicy Instytutu Medycznego zamiast czerwca na październik 1935 roku. Bolszewicka władza okupacyjna rozwiązała konflikt na swoją korzyść, zwiększając liczbę wykładów w języku rosyjskim. Tutaj chciałbym obalić powszechne twierdzenie, że we wczesnych latach powojennych Lwów z polskiego przekształcał się na ukraiński. Nie. To był radziecki Lwów albo raczej rosyjski. I do końca lat 50., początku lat 60., dopóki miejscowa ludność ukraińska, która przenosiła się do miasta, nie wzrosła i nie przetrawiła 100-tysięczną rosyjską anklawę, która zasadzila Lwów po wojnie. Na przykład już w roku akademickim 1937 na 1948 studenci Rosjanie stanowili jedna z największych grup etnicznych Instytutu Politechnicznego i Instytutu Handlu Ekonomicznego. Na uniwersytecie i innych instytutach stosunek liczby Ukraińców i rosyjskich studentów był równy. Większość z nich nie mówiła po ukraińsku. Niektóre відділи uniwersyteckie, zwłaszcza w pierwsze lata studiów, były obsadzone głównie przez studentów ze wschodnich obwodów. Przywołania na studia miejscowych studentów miały miejsce czystki i wybiorość, nawet mimo niewłaściwego przygotowania studentów ze wschodu. Różnica pomiędzy studentami miejscowymi i przyjeżdżałymi, tak zwanymi wschodniakami, która wprowadzona administracja bolszewicka, doprowadziła do konfliktu interesów. Analiza dokumentu Lwowskiego Komitetu Regionalnego za rok 1936 pokazuje, że w wszystkich uczelniach Lwowa w tym czasie wyraźnie toczono konfrontację pomiędzy lokalnymi studentami i przyjeżdżałymi wschodniakami. Nawet grupy akademickie były formowane odrębnie z miejscowych i przyjeżdżych studentów. Ze względu na powszechny wówczas system donosu, miejscowi studenci tworzyli grupy towarzyskie odrębne od studentów ze wschodu. Jednak kategorycznego oderwania pomiędzy Ukraińcami ze wschodu i zachodu nie było, czego nie można powiedzieć o relacjach z rosyjskimi studentami. Wśród studentów wschodniacy wyróżniali się przede wszystkim wiekiem. Ci studenty mieli mniej wiedzieli o narodowościowych różnicach w Galicji, dlatego czasami nawet przyjmowali miejscową ludność ukraińską za Polaków. Często byli to ludzie, którzy przeszli wojnę. Dlatego też kontakt pomiędzy miejscową galicyjską młodzieżą i nimi ustanawiał się powoli. Byłoby błędem jednak powiedzieć, że nie mieli oni odczuć narodowych. Cytat. Jestem taki głupi, jak myślicie. Podczas wojny widzieliśmy różnicę między Ukraińcami i Rosjanami. Kiedy oficer rosyjski kopał nas po tyłku, mówił хохли од'їжджалися до прyodu під кулі. Так, згодні з поминанням Омеляна Нестайка, оповідав виходець зі Сходньої України. Ті студенти, які прожили по воєнних дорогах Європи, здавали собі справи, що західний стиль життя є не тільки горший, але у велі випадків значно ліпше від соціалістичного, а фронтове братство росіян і українців у велі випадків є przyjaźń warunkowa. Przestojąc analizę obecnej statystyki rosyjskiej, możemy skonstruować swego rodzaju zbiorowy wizerunek powojennego studenta. W większości przypadków był to mężczyzna, co dziwne po stratach po wojnie, przyjeżdżaj ze wschodu, mieszkaniec miasta, pochodzący z rodzin białych komerczyków. Teraz porozmawiamy o wykładowcach. Oprócz problemy tworzenia właściwej materialno-technicznej podstawy, centralnym zagadnieniem wyższych uczelni Lwowa у вчасних лятах повоєнних було запевнення кадрів викладовчих. Брак науковців виникав з репресій нацистовських і большевицьких, oraz об'єктивних причин, зв'язаних з появленням нових учельні. Ці львовські викладовці, які прожили, не завжди могли достати праці через впровадження ідеологічних програм едукаційних. Для того в першому семестрі року академічного 1945 на 1946 на університеті не відбувався цілий шерек професіональних занять і курсів спеціальних. В зв'язку з тим, в лятах 1944 на 1945 зі сходу до обводу західних zostało скерованих 968 osób składu profesorsko-wykładowskiego. Większość pracowników naukowych została przeniesiona z sowieckich instytutów badawczych. Wśród przyjeżdżych równa część stanowili wykładowcy z Moskwy, Kijowa, Charkowa. Szczególnie, że w odniesieniu do dokumentu Відділу культури Львовського комітету обводового КПБУ станом на 1 квітня 1945 року wśród 1870 wykładowców przyjechawszych pracujących w wyższych uczelniach miasta, tylko 600 było Ukraińcami. Wśród pierwszej fali przyjeżdżych wykładowców nie wszyscy mieli odpowiedni poziom edukacyjny, a poza tym niektórzy z nich w ogóle nie mało wyższego wykształcenia. Odsetek wykładowców miejscowego pochodzenia na uczelniach wyższych zachodniej Ukrainy był nieznaczny i w 1947 roku stanowił tylko 17%. Relacja pomiędzy wykładowcami a studentami w uczelniach i poza nimi odzwierciedlała podziały regionalne. Powszechnym zjawiskiem było, że przyjeździ wykładowcy mieli raczej chłodne nastawienie do miejscowych studentów i na odwrót. Podziały regionalne pomiędzy studentami i wykładowcami, a często pomiędzy samymi studentami, były zwłaszcza widoczne w procesie studiowania. Dyskryminacja na podstawie języka wyróżniała Турчення ідеологічне в процесі едукації сталося каталізатором непорозумінь поміж студентами а викладачами. Так więc, we wczesnych latach powojennych we Lwowie w porównaniu z okresem przedwojennym gwałtownie wzrosła liczba uczelni i studentów. Wzrost ten osiągnięty był za pomocą środków administracyjnych, dlatego wymagał dodatkowego personelu i zasobów. Dzięki pełnemu poparciu kierownictwa partii do Lwowa przyjeżdżała duża liczba rosyjskojęzycznych specjalistów, którzy przyczynili się do poważnych podziałów pomiędzy przyjeżdżami a miejscowymi. Działalność wyższych uczelni w tym czasie mała na celu nie tylko rozwój edukacji i nauki w regionie, jak prowadzenie sowietyzacji i doprowadziło do konfliktu między studentami a wykładowcami. Wykładowcy i studenty, którzy przyjeżdżali ze wschodnich obwodów Ukrainy do Lwowa, w większości nie używali języka ukraińskiego i stawali się ważnym czynnikiem rusyfikacji. Aktywna rusyfikacja i sowietyzacja uczelni wyższych stała się dodatkowym powodem do udziału studentów w akcjach protestacyjnych. Jeżeli w wczesnych latach powojennych konflikty te były raczej przyjazne i nosili dyskusyjny charakter, to w końcu lat 60. antagonizm pomiędzy wykładowcami i studentami na podstawie ideowej osiągnął swój szczyt, zagrażając tym staniem nawet więzieniem. Z biegiem czasu presja ideologiczna i represje doprowadziły do skutku. Szansa otrzymania wyższego wykształcenia, perspektywa osiągnięcia stabilnego statusu społecznego i względnej niezależności finansowej były atrakcyjne dla młodzieży galicyjskiej, co często zmuszało młodych ludzi do podejmowania trudnych decyzji życiowych dla siebie, idąc na kompromis z pośrodkiem radzieckim. Tutaj proszę zobaczyć na foto absolwentów i wykładowców Instytutu Pedagogicznego. To 1951 rok. Kierownictwo Instytutu Rosjanie. Dziękuję za uwagę.
Bardzo dziękuję za ten ostatni już referat w obecnej sesji. Zachęcam Państwa do zadawania pytań. Bardzo proszę tylko o to, aby pytania były możliwie jak najbardziej zwięzłe. Ladies and gentlemen, I open the discussion. Please just only keep on mind that we've got limited time and please be as briefly as it's possible. Czy są jakieś pytania? Proszę jeszcze przedstawić się przy zadawaniu pytań, przedstawić instytucję, którą Państwo reprezentują. Bardzo proszę.
My name is Mark Kramer from Harvard University. My question is for Ms. Kimura. In the Liczne Fondy of Suslov and of Molotov and of Mikoyan, I've come across a lot of discussions and reports about the Yugoslav students who were in the Soviet Union at that time. But what they were concerned about was that those students might, in fact, not prove especially loyal to the Soviet Union and instead would become an agent for the spread of Titoism, as they called it. So they wanted to keep very close watch on them and would expel certain ones that seemed not especially conforming to Soviet norms. So I'm wondering, are you also looking at that issue about their effects on the Soviet Union, not just the Soviet Union's effects on them?
Proszę Państwa, może zbierzemy pytania i później oddam głos prelegentom. Czy mamy jeszcze jakieś pytania? Have you got any more questions? Bardzo proszę.
Corina Schmitzer, PhD student at the University of Glasgow. Thank you for your interesting presentations first. I have the same question for Professor Previk and Dr. Kimura. If you can detail a little bit, why have you chosen your period 1948, 1956, 1954 respectively, to study the students during Stalin-Tito's split? Thank you.
Have you got any more questions? Czy mamy jeszcze jakieś pytania? Bardzo proszę.
Moje nazwisko Lesiakowski, ja reprezentuję Uniwersytet Łódzki. Chciałem zapytać pana Prewisewicza o dalsze losy tych studentów jugosłowiańskich popierających Stalina po zmianach politycznych, po śmierci Stalina, po przyjściu do władzy Chruszczowa. Czy ci ludzie zostali już na marginesie, czy też gdzieś jeszcze się włączyli w nowy porządek? Dziękuję.
Czy są jeszcze pytania? Bardzo proszę.
Katarzyna Korzeniewska, Kraków. I would like to pose a question to Mrs. Glossová concerning this issue of selecting students to the university. You told us that it was also done on the basis of ethnic or national identity of the students, like Hungarians were excluded or Germans. I have a question concerning Rusyns who live in eastern Slovakia. Are often of the Orthodox obedience, and whether you know any cases or situations when they would try to get to the university and were not admitted on this particular ethnic basis. Thank you.
And maybe the last question, have you got?
Piotr Lechowski z Uniwersytetu Rzeszowskiego. Króciutkie pytanie do pana doktora Romana Genechy. Jak wiadomo, obaj także zajmujemy się podobną tematyką. Także badam stosunki międzyludzkie, powiedzmy, w powojennym Lwowie. Chciałem zapytać, jak długo możemy mówić o wyraźnym żywiole polskim, czyli profesorach i studentach polskiego pochodzenia, czy po prostu Polakach w uniwersytetach i szczególnie tutaj na Politechnice Lwowskiej zostało około 10 wykładowców Polaków i czy oni jakoś wyraźnie wyróżniali się, powiedzmy, do 53 roku? Dziękuję.
Bardzo dziękuję za pytania. Oddaję głos prelegentom. Proponuję, aby I suggest you to answer on this role that we started this conference. Mrs. Glossová.
Thank you very much for the question. Unfortunately, I have I didn't found any mentioning of the students of Rusin ethnicity and their problems with the accepting to the university. Maybe later, after 1948, and the reason would be the religious, not the national or ethnical. But in the years I was talking about, from 1945 to 48, the only minorities which were like in the focus were German and Hungarian, because of it was on the basis of like the collective scene because of the World War II. The people of these nationalities were also expelled from Czechoslovakia in general. So. Of course, also the students of these minorities or nationalities couldn't study at the universities in Czechoslovakia. It was, yes, but I don't know nothing about the students from other nationalities except the Hungarian and German. Thank you.
Bardzo proszę, pan Roman Genega.
Викладовці політехніки і не вирожнялися. Нічим мусили робити те, що хотіла Рада радянська.
Mr. Martin Previsic, could you answer to the questions that were put?
Yeah, I'll go one by one. I will jump in and meet Professor Kramer question. It is interesting that regarding Yugoslav students in Soviet Union, when they returned to Yugoslavia, and most of them did return to Yugoslavia, it is interesting that they were subjugated to very harsh treatment of Yugoslav's secret police. In the same way, and to ask question about Soviet Union, they were branded as potential spies of NKVD. So I remember reading documents about those who returned to Yugoslavia, and they were very carefully watched and guarded because they were branded as potential spies. They were subjugated to terror, and most of them ended up in Goli Otok prison camp. It is very interesting. I jumped in your question, but with one remark regarding question about after the Stalin death. Basically, it is very interesting thing. Those regular party members who sided with Stalin and who were jailed and sent to labor camps, after their return from labor camp on freedom, they were subjugated to very harsh treatment. They were left without a job for years. There were some kind of political and society boycott. But the students who were in same camp and ran to the same camp and been under repression, who were expelled from university. Most of them, they got opportunity, or most of them, many of them got opportunity to return to faculty, study again, and to establish a career. It is a very interesting thing, because all these guys who were, I was talking about, Ivan Esih, Vlado Bobinac, Ivan Kovačić, they were all in Goli Otok in 49, and later they established a very important political, societal careers. They were professors in universities, but never political careers. So that's a distinction between treatment of party members, older party members and students. Those who are sentenced all end up in a labor camp, but after labor camp, treatment was very, very different towards them. So party gave opportunity to younger people, to students who were, of course, they ran to the camp, but unlike the older party members, they weren't subjugated to some kind of society boycott and that. And of course, IB, regarding the question of IB support in universities after the Tito-Stalin split and the death of Stalin, it was after 51, there was basically no more real expression of support of Stalin, because UDBA crushed it all. Secret police, so it was like basically one straight line, although the mass arrests in Yugoslavia were occurred. And second question, why I did this topic? Because I've been researching I've been researching Tito-Stalin split in general, all the aspects, especially the repression, but all the other aspects. So this is one topic which would interested me. Why the students, how the students did react in a Tito-Stalin split, and the conclusion is they reacted similar to the older communists, because everyone was asking questions. Someone sided with Stalin, someone with Tito, so it is something which naturally occurred. And especially some of my older teachers in university, when I was a student, they were IB supporters, so I was the topic represented itself, just nothing special.
Yeah. So thank you for the question. The first question is why Soviet politics decided to use Yugoslav students? Is right? Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to answer the question now, because I have not developed it yet. But so far, I would say that on the basis of my archive documents research, I didn't see any threat of Soviet politics of Yugoslav students and Yugoslav political immigrants. So, sorry, I can't give you the correct answer now. And the second question is about after death of Stalin, activities of Yugoslav political immigrants in Soviet Union and the country's people's democracy. In 1954, after death of Stalin, Soviet Union leader Khrushchev tried to repair relations between Yugoslavia, and at that time, Stalin sent a letter to all leaders of the countries of people's democracy that they have to stop anti-Yugoslav propaganda campaign totally. So after that, their activity was totally stopped. So that's the answer to the question. Thank you.
Szanowni Państwo, ponieważ mamy jeszcze trochę czasu, czy są jeszcze może pytania? We've got a little bit time. Have you got maybe any more questions? Dobrze, rozumiem. Podsumowując sesję, chciałbym przede wszystkim bardzo podziękować prelegentom. Myślę, że usłyszeliśmy tutaj o kilku bardzo ciekawych zagadnieniach, o procesie sowietyzacji, też nawiązując do tego, co powiedział pan profesor Kawalec, otwierając tę sesję, o znaczeniu, jakie nadawały władze komunistyczne, totalitarne studentom jako przyszłej elicie państwowej. Widzieliśmy to właśnie na przykładzie Uniwersytetu Comeniuskiego w Bratysławie, czy też Uniwersytetu Lwowskiego. Myślę, że bardzo ciekawe były też referaty dotyczące konfliktu jugosłowiańsko-sowieckiego i zachowań studentów w tym okresie. Jeszcze tak może nawiązując do tej tematyki poruszonej przede wszystkim przez panią Kaori Kimura, chciałbym tylko wspomnieć, że wśród zwolenników, wśród osób, które opowiedziały się po stronie Stalina w konflikcie Tito-Stalin, wśród tych osób, które zdecydowały się pozostać w Polsce, było to w sumie 18 osób, czyli w porównaniu do innych państw bloku wschodniego grupa marginalna, jednak nieznaczna, ale dominowali wśród nich właśnie studenci. Był tam też sekretarz ambasady, był jeden czy dwie osoby zatrudnione w dyplomacji, natomiast studenci byli grupą dominującą. Między innymi jedna osoba studiowała tutaj na Politechnice Wrocławskiej, Żywko Subotić, tak się nazywał ten człowiek. Wykorzystywani byli oni oczywiście w tej kampanii antyjugosłowiańskiej w celu zdyskredytowania reżimu jugosłowiańskiego i zaprezentowania tego modelu sowieckiego jako jedynego właściwego wzoru. Myślę, że te ustalenia dotyczące konfliktu Tito-Stalin, które zostały tu zaprezentowane, będą bardzo ważnym takim wkładem też dla historiografii polskiej, szczególnie w kontekście kilku istotnych książek, które ukazały się w ostatnim czasie. Mam tu na myśli przede wszystkim znakomitą książkę Roberta Spałka, Komuniści przeciwko komunistom. Jeszcze raz bardzo dziękuję prelegentom i zapraszam Państwa na przerwę.